There's a moment, maybe you felt it, where you walk into a room and something inside you shrinks, not because anyone said anything, not because you don't belong, but because somewhere along the way you learn to second guess your presence. You learn to make yourself smaller, more agreeable, more palatable. And now, even when you're more than qualified, even when your heart is solid, even when you've shown up for everyone else time and time again, you still hesitate to stand in your full strength. That's the silent struggle. Not that you don't have worth, but that you've spent so long waiting for someone else to validate it, you forgot how to carry it on your own. And this is where the shift begins, not with loud ego, not with arrogance, but with quiet certainty, with choosing on the inside to act as if you were already enough, already chosen, already capable. Not because you're better than anyone else, but because no one else gets to outrank your worth in your own story. You lead with calm, you walk with quiet confidence, and you stop apologizing for being whole. That's the energy we step into, not to prove something, but to finally stop proving anything at all. Some of us carry ourselves through the day like we're on trial, measuring every word, every move, every glance, wondering if we're enough for the people around us. We shrink in rooms where we should stand tall, overthink in conversations that should have been simple, and replay moments where we didn't speak up because something in us still questions our place. And the truth is, it's exhausting. It's not that you don't know your value. It's that somewhere along the line, that value got buried under comparison, past rejection, or quiet voices that made you feel like confidence was arrogance. But here's the shift: acting as if you're the best doesn't mean pretending or putting others down. It means moving through life like you finally remember who you are. It means giving yourself permission to belong in every room you step into before anyone else does. Not out of ego, but out of clarity, because no one else is built exactly like you, and that alone makes you irreplaceable. Let's talk about what it looks like to live from that truth, calmly, quietly, with no need to prove a thing. There's a quiet kind of pain that comes from showing up fully and still feeling unseen. You give your best, you lead with kindness, you listen more than you speak, and yet something in the room tells you you're not it. Maybe it's how they glance past you. Maybe it's how your ideas are dismissed until someone else repeats them. Or maybe it's just the energy, the feeling that no matter how much you offer, you're still on the outside looking in, and that can shake you. Because when people don't see your value, it's easy to start questioning if there's any value there to begin with. But here's the deeper truth most people don't say out loud: belonging doesn't start when others accept you. It starts when you accept yourself fully. Even in the silence, even in the spaces where the recognition never comes. See, when you learn to show up like you belong, you stop waiting for the room to tell you who you are. You walk in already knowing. That doesn't mean you're arrogant. It means you're anchored. You're not hoping they'll approve. You've already decided you're worthy of being in the room, and that shift changes everything. Because people can feel it when you're not chasing them. They can feel it when your presence isn't desperate, but steady. And let's be honest, this isn't easy. It's hard to feel overlooked. It's hard to stay grounded when you're doing the emotional work in relationships, but it still feels one-sided. Maybe you're in a partnership where you carry most of the empathy, where you do most of the reaching. Or you're at work giving consistent effort, but others seem to leap ahead while you're stuck proving yourself again and again. That hurts. And it's okay to name that. This isn't about pretending it doesn't affect you. It's about not letting it define you. When others don't see you, the reflex is to shrink or to perform, to dial down your truth or turn up a version of yourself that gets attention. But either way, you're moving away from who you are. And that's the cost. Every time you shift for belonging, you trade authenticity for acceptance. And that kind of acceptance never lasts. Because deep down, you know they don't really know you. They just know the part of you that was safe enough to be seen. So what do? You stay as yourself, fully present, fully rooted, even if you're the only one holding space for your worth. That's the quiet power people don't talk about. It's not flashy. It's not loud. But it's unshakable. Because once you stop abandoning yourself just to be understood, the people who are meant to see you, really see you, finally can. Not because you chased them, but because you stood still long enough for the right ones to find you. You belong. Not because they made space for you, but because you stopped asking for permission. There comes a point in your life where you get tired, not physically, but emotionally tired of asking people to treat you right, tired of repeating yourself, tired of spelling out how you deserve to be spoken to, tired of trying to convince someone that your needs matter too. And that kind of exhaustion, that's usually where people confuse confidence with volume. Like, maybe if I speak louder, I'll be taken seriously. Maybe if I push harder, they'll finally understand. But the real strength doesn't show up in the shouting. It shows up in the silence, the kind of silence that comes when you finally realize you don't have to beg for what's basic. Confidence isn't about putting others in their place. It's about knowing your place and refusing to leave it just to make someone else comfortable. And this is where the relationship work really begins, because most of us were taught that love looks like proving ourselves, that if someone pulls away, it's our job to close the gap, that if they shut down, we should soften more, that if they dismiss us, maybe we were asking for too much. And after a while, that pattern trains you to believe that your worth is negotiable. But it's not. The right love won't need a sales pitch, and the right people won't need to be begged to care. You can feel the difference when you're constantly over-explaining yourself, walking on eggshells, or shrinking your emotions to protect theirs. That's not confidence. That's survival, and it's not your job to keep relationships alive by abandoning yourself. Confidence means being able to sit with the discomfort of someone else not understanding you and not making that your emergency. It means saying your truth calmly and letting go of whether they agree with it. Not because you don't care, but because your peace matters more than their validation. Sometimes that's the hardest part, choosing peace over being liked, choosing boundaries over being the easy one, choosing to stay quiet, not out of fear, but because you don't need to explain your worth to someone who's already shown you they're not listening. And if we're being honest, that's scary, because when you stop begging, the silence can feel heavy. The space between you and them gets real. But that space, that's where clarity lives. That's where you start to hear your own voice again. That's where you finally realize that what you were chasing wasn't love. It was relief. Relief from the ache of being misunderstood. Relief from carrying the weight of someone else's lack. Confidence isn't about being above anyone. It's about being rooted enough to not chase what's beneath your standards. You don't need to yell. You don't need to plead. You don't need to shrink. You just need to remember who you are when you're not trying to win someone over. Because the people who are meant for you won't make you beg for the bare minimum. They'll meet you where you already stand. There's a moment, maybe you've had it, where you realize you've been editing yourself just to make a relationship work. You soften your voice, avoid certain truths, dim your excitement, or hold back parts of your personality, not because you want to, but because experience has taught you that when you show up fully, too sensitive, too serious, too opinionated, too emotional, and what begins as subtle compromise slowly becomes self-abandonment, not all at once, but little by little, you shrink, you quiet your needs, you settle for being tolerated when what you long for is to be deeply seen. And the H that builds from that, it's real, it's heavy, and it doesn't go away just because the relationship stays intact. The truth is, some relationships aren't built to hold the fullness of who you are, not because you're broken, and not because they're always bad people, but because the structure was never meant to support your growth. And when you try to force it, when you twist and fold yourself into smaller shapes, you don't just lose yourself, you start resenting the very relationship you worked so hard to maintain. That's the emotional cost most people don't talk about. You can only go so long living half a life before something inside you starts to break down. And often, that break looks like anxiety or exhaustion or silence in a place that used to feel safe. Sometimes you end up performing emotional labor just to hold the relationship together. You make peace when you're still hurt. You stay calm when you're boiling inside. You excuse behavior that you tell your best friend to walk away from. Not because you're weak, but because a part of you still believes love requires sacrifice, even if that sacrifice is you. But healthy love doesn't ask you to shrink. It invites you to expand. And that means you have to tell the truth about where you've been shrinking, even if it means the relationship starts to feel shaky. You deserve to take up space in your own life, in your conversations, in your choices, in your feelings. And if someone pulls away when you stop bending over backward, that's not rejection. That's clarity. You don't have to fight to stay in rooms that are too small for your heart. You don't have to tone yourself down just to avoid conflict. Real love, real connection, it doesn't require a diluted version of you. It welcomes all of it. That doesn't mean you're always right. It doesn't mean you don't still have growth to do. But it does mean you're done trying to be digestible for people who never try to understand your flavor in the first place. You can stop shrinking now. The people who are meant to walk with you don't need you to be smaller. They need you to be real, fully expressed, fully present, and finally free. There's a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from doing too much. It comes from explaining too much, explaining your tone, explaining your feelings, explaining why something bothered you, explaining what you meant, even after you said it calmly and clearly the first time. And after a while, it starts to wear on you, not just because you're tired of talking, but because it slowly starts to feel like your experience isn't enough on its own. It needs to be justified, backed up, made palatable. And if you've ever been in that cycle, you know how quickly it turns into self-doubt. You start to wonder, was I overreacting? Did I take that too personally? Maybe it really wasn't that big of a deal. And just like that, your trust in yourself gets chipped away. What's really happening in those moments is deeper than just communication. It's about whether you believe your own inner compass, whether you trust your gut, your read of a situation, your right to speak on what you feel. Because when that trust is solid, you don't need a 10-step explanation. You can say, this doesn't feel right to me, and let that be enough. But when that trust is shaky, you start over explaining everything, hoping that if you lay it out clearly enough, the other person will finally get it and validate it. And that's the catch. When your peace is dependent on their validation, you're always one misunderstanding away from feeling unstable. This plays out quietly in so many relationships. You try to bring something up and they say you're too sensitive. You express a boundary and they call you cold. You set a limit and they tell you you're being dramatic. And in those moments, the pressure to defend your truth gets loud. But here's what's real: just because someone doesn't understand your boundary doesn't mean it's not needed. Just because they wouldn't feel hurt in the same situation doesn't mean your hurt isn't valid. You are allowed to honor your experience without convincing anyone else to agree with it. This isn't about shutting people out. It's not about refusing to communicate. It's about noticing when you've crossed the line from clarifying to proving. And that line is important, because the more you explain in search of approval, the further you drift from self-trust. And the truth is, not everyone will see it the way you do. Some people don't have the emotional range to meet you there. And that's okay. It's not your job to carry their capacity. It's your job to stay rooted in what you know to be true. When you trust yourself, your tone gets calmer. Your words get fewer. Not because you care less, but because you no longer need to be heard to feel secure. You've already heard yourself. You've already checked in. And that quiet confidence, that's what keeps you steady when someone else's reaction tries to shake your foundation. You can say what you need to say. And if it lands, great. If not, you don't chase clarity from someone who isn't willing to hold it with you. You let it go, and you keep walking in peace, not because they gave it to you, but because you gave it to yourself. There's a point in some relationships, maybe more than you'd like to admit, where you start to wonder if you're just too much, too emotional, too intense, too honest. You bring your whole heart, your full presence, your real thoughts to the table, and you're met with discomfort or silence or withdrawal. And that moment stings, because it's not just about rejection. It's about being made to feel like your depth is a burden, like your emotional clarity is overwhelming, like your need for connection is somehow a flaw. And when that happens enough times, you start to do what so many people do. You dial yourself down. You stop saying what you really feel. You become careful. You become smaller, not because it's who you are, but because it's what's been safer. But let's tell the truth. You're not too much. You're just asking for more than some people are capable of giving. And that's not a fault, it's a signal. It's the moment you get to pause and ask, is this space deep enough to hold who I really am? Because if it isn't, that's not your cue to become shallow. That's your cue to stop pouring into ground that was never prepared to grow with you. A lot of people aren't avoiding you. They're avoiding themselves. They're not backing away from your depth because you're wrong. They're backing away because they haven't done the work to meet you there. And it's easier for them to call you too much than to admit they're not ready. That dynamic can leave you second, guessing your natural instincts. You bring up a real feeling and they change the subject. You ask a thoughtful question and they say you're reading too much into things. You want a deeper level of presence and they call it needy. But what they're really saying is, I'm not comfortable going there. And that's important to see, because if you don't see it, you start internalizing the message that you're broken for wanting more. And you're not. You're just honest about what you need. Here's what you need to hear. Your depth is not a liability. It's not something you need to fix or tone down. It's a gift. It's the reason people feel safe around you. It's why you can sit with someone's pain without rushing to fix it. It's why you ask the questions that make people stop and actually think. And yes, it's also why some people can't handle you. But that's okay. You don't have to dilute yourself just to be digestible. The ones who are ready for depth won't flinch when you speak from your heart. They won't shrink back when you bring your full self forward. They'll lean in. They'll meet you there. So instead of trying to become less, try becoming more grounded in who you already are. The goal isn't to be accepted by everyone. It's to be real with yourself. And the people who can meet you in that realness, they'll never ask you to be anything but whole. There's a quiet habit so many of us carry, and it usually starts early. We wait. We wait for someone to notice the effort we put in. We wait for the thank you. We wait for the moment someone looks at us and says, "You matter. You're enough. You're seen." And while that waiting might look calm on the outside, inside it wears you down, because every time you do something out of love, out of care, out of consistency, and it goes unnoticed, you start to wonder if you're doing it wrong. And then you do more, you give more, you bend further, and the recognition still doesn't come. That's when the ache shows up. The one that quietly says, maybe I'm not valued because I'm not valuable. But that's not the truth. That's just the cost of tying your worth to someone else's awareness of it. Relationships get heavy when you're constantly waiting to be chosen in a way that you haven't chosen yourself. When you're hoping that if you just love harder, stay quieter, forgive faster, or give more, maybe then they'll finally give back. But here's the shift. You don't have to wait for permission to be valued. You get to decide right now that your presence is worth something, even if they never say it. That your voice matters, even if they talk over it. That your boundaries are valid, even if they push against them. And I know that's not easy, especially when you've been in spaces where your worth was only acknowledged when it was convenient for someone else. This shows up in all kinds of relationships. You might be the partner who's always steady, always supportive, but they only notice you when you pull away. You might be the friend who checks in, shows up, remembers the details, but no one asks how you're doing. Or maybe it's at work, where you keep things running behind the scenes, but someone else always gets the credit. And after a while, you start internalizing the silence, like maybe you just need to be a little better, a little more. But the truth is, you're already enough. You've just been waiting for someone else to say it out loud. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be appreciated. That's human, but there's a difference between receiving appreciation and requiring it to feel secure. One is healthy. The other keeps you stuck in cycles where your peace depends on how someone else shows up that day. When you stop waiting for permission, you stop giving people that kind of power. You start walking into rooms with the quiet confidence of someone who knows what they bring. You don't have to prove it. You just have to carry it. And sometimes, when you finally stop waiting, when you start honoring your value without the applause, you'll notice something. The right people start noticing too. Not because you needed them to, but because you stopped needing it at all. That's what value looks like. Not loud, not needy, just steady, just real, just yours. A lot of us were raised with this unspoken belief that being a good person means staying small. That humility means staying quiet. That if you speak up, set boundaries, or take the lead, you're somehow being selfish or arrogant. And so even when we have something meaningful to say, we hold back. Even when we're capable, we wait to be asked. Even when we've done the work, we downplay it. Not because we don't believe in ourselves, but because somewhere deep down we're afraid that standing tall might look like pride. And that's the trap. Humility gets confused with invisibility, but they're not the same thing. You can be humble and still take up space. You can walk into a room knowing your value and still be kind. You can take ownership of your voice without taking anything from anyone else. You can lead with quiet confidence without ever stepping on someone else to feel strong. That's the version of humility we're often not taught. The kind that's grounded, not hidden. The kind that doesn't apologize for showing up fully, but also doesn't need to dominate to feel worthy. And in relationships, this shows up all the time. You find yourself shrinking so someone else doesn't feel threatened. You minimize your needs because you don't want to come across as too much. You stay silent because you don't want to create tension. And after a while, that becomes your default, making yourself small to keep the peace. But the problem is, peace that depends on your silence isn't peace, it's control. And deep down, you feel it, the buildup, the resentment, the exhaustion of holding everything in, trying to be easy, trying not to rock the boat. But what if humility isn't about stepping back? What if it's about stepping in with gentleness, with honesty, with calm, and saying, I belong here too? Because you do. Your presence isn't a threat. Your voice isn't too much. Your truth doesn't have to come with disclaimers. Taking up space means owning your experience. It means speaking clearly when something doesn't feel right, even if it makes someone uncomfortable. It means allowing yourself to succeed without guilt. It means not hiding your light just because someone else hasn't learned how to hold their own yet. And that's the tension for so many kind-hearted people. You want to stay humble, so you stay quiet. But real humility isn't about silence, it's about alignment. Knowing who you are without needing to prove it. You can be both grounded and bold. You can be both soft and firm. You can be both humble and seen. And the people who truly value you won't ask you to choose. They won't need you to shrink for their comfort. They'll make room for you, just as you've made room for so many others. So take your space, not with ego, not with force, just with presence, just with truth. You're not taking anything away from anyone. You're just finally allowing yourself to be seen. There's something powerful about realizing you no longer have to live on emotional autopilot, that you don't have to keep repeating the same relational patterns just because they're familiar, that you're allowed to outgrow dynamics that require your silence in order to function. And that's what all of this has been about, not just becoming better, but becoming clearer about who you are, what you need, and what you're no longer willing to carry. Some of us were taught that strength is loud, that you have to take up space with force in order to be respected. Others were taught to make themselves small to be agreeable, to bend until there's barely anything left. But real strength, the kind that lasts, it's quiet, it's rooted. It doesn't need to perform. It's the strength that says, I know who I am, even when no one else affirms it. It's the kind of strength that chooses peace over proving, presence over approval. Because at some point, you get tired of living for the nods of people who will never fully see you. You get tired of shrinking to fit relationships that can't hold the full depth of who you are. And you finally realize maybe they didn't have the capacity. Maybe they weren't ready. Maybe it wasn't that you were too much. Maybe it's just that they weren't willing to meet you where you live in truth, in tenderness, in real emotional presence. And that's okay. Not everyone will be ready. Not everyone will stay, but you. You keep showing up for yourself, not with pride, but with clarity, not with defensiveness, but with self-trust. Because when you begin to trust yourself, really trust yourself, you stop explaining so much. You stop over-functioning in conversations that don't deserve your labor. You stop offering endless clarity to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. That doesn't make you cold. That makes you clear. And clarity isn't cruelty. Boundaries aren't rejection. Choosing your peace isn't abandonment. It's alignment. It's finally letting go of the need to be everything for everyone and instead choosing to be fully, deeply you. And maybe you're still learning how to do that. Maybe you're still in that in between, still figuring out how to stop waiting for permission to be valued. Still learning to walk into rooms like you already belong. That's okay. Growth doesn't always look like a loud, dramatic shift. Sometimes it looks like the quiet moment you finally say to yourself, I'm not apologizing for this anymore. You're allowed to take up space with humility, with grace, with stillness. You don't have to dominate. You don't have to prove. You don't have to earn basic respect. The right people, the ones who are emotionally mature, who are capable of depth, who are doing their own work, they'll see you. And not because you shouted, not because you begged, but because you stood rooted in your truth and you stopped trying to sell them a version of you they'd be comfortable with. That's the shift. That's where the power really is. Not in being the loudest in the room, but in being the calmest. Not in having all the answers, but in asking better questions. Not in being perfect, but in being honest about where you are and what you need. You don't need to become a different person to be loved well. You don't need to keep performing emotional labor for people who have never done the same for you. And you don't need to earn your place in relationships that feel like a constant test. You are allowed, right now, without proving anything, to stand tall in who you are and what you bring. And let me say this clearly, being emotionally available is not a weakness. Wanting meaningful connection is not too much. Setting a boundary is not an act of war. These are signs of maturity. These are signs that you've lived through the mess, through the miscommunication, through the moments you gave too much of yourself to people who gave too little. And you've decided that your energy, your voice, your peace, they matter now. There's a cost to dimming yourself to keep the peace. And there's a cost to always being the one who bends. Eventually, you bend so far you lose sight of who you were before the bending started. And the road back to yourself, it's slow, but it's worth it. You stop justifying your needs. You stop chasing people who don't reciprocate. You stop mistaking chaos for connection, and you start creating a new standard, quietly but firmly. One rooted in mutual respect, in emotional maturity, in real safety. The kind of safety that doesn't require you to disappear in order to be loved. And if you're listening to this thinking, but I don't feel strong yet. I still feel like I'm trying. That's okay too. Strength doesn't mean you don't feel the pull to shrink. It just means you notice it now and you choose differently. It means you've stopped automatically making yourself the problem. It means you've learned to sit with discomfort without abandoning yourself. And that's powerful. It's powerful to walk away when something isn't right, even if you still love them. It's powerful to say, this version of me deserves to be honored. It's powerful to believe that your worth is not on trial. You are not asking for too much. You are asking the wrong people. And now, maybe for the first time, you're giving yourself what you've been waiting for others to give you. Respect, kindness, permission to be whole. You've spent enough time waiting to be seen, enough time over-explaining, enough time performing for approval. Now you step forward, not louder, not harder, but with the calm strength of someone who finally knows they don't have to shrink or shout to be worth something. So let that be your energy moving forward. Anchored, not anxious. Confident, not combative, humble, but unapologetically present. Because when you act as if you're the best, not above others, but in alignment with yourself, you stop negotiating your worth. You stop trying to earn a seat at a table that was never built for your growth. You build your own table and you take your place at it fully. No need to beg, no need to defend, no need to disappear. Just you, steady, honest, and finally home in your own skin. That's not arrogance. That's ownership. And from that place, everything starts to change.